Harris. Thank you for joining me. And as you can see, I am not where I normally am shooting. I'm on the road today, but I did want to make sure that we got this done, because unfortunately I had to delete last week's episodes. Unfortunately, the audio was absolute garbage, and it's looking like it might try to get that way again. So let me fix this thing. So, but this week I want to pick up where we left off on the last episode, and we talked about the temptation of Jesus, how we need to put on the full armor, and it's really fasting that is absolutely key for the followers of Christ to partake in, because it disconnects us from our physical needs and helps us solely rely on God. Now, this week we're going to do things a little bit differently, and thought I brought my Bible in here, but I guess I did not, so I will make do with the phone, and I'll try to pull it up so I can share it with you guys so you can see it as well. Let's see. So we're going to go to John. We're going to be in John chapter 1 today, John 1, and it's going to be verses 19 through 24. So let me type that in real quick so we can read that. Let me make sure I put King James. Alright guys, I know it's going to be a little bit different today than it normally is, but it will be. And if you guys are listening to this Thursday on the podcast platform, I'll make sure to have everything in the show notes for you. That way you can look this stuff up for yourself. I probably won't keep it as long either, because it's almost dinner time. I don't want to hold you guys, so we'll make this as quick as possible. And I'll try to put out a longer version this week on the podcast that you guys can listen to. Hold on, guys, real quick. My wife's at the door.
I was just looking for you. I found you.
Okay. All right, so John chapter 1, verses 19 through 24, and got our handy Bible Gateway app, which, of course, you guys are seeing it backwards. But there it is. Hey.
Hey Dad, I do podcasts in here.
You do? Okay. Well, hey, I'll be right out, okay? Go play with your friends.
Okay.
Shut the door for me.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, that's my oldest guy. She loves to podcast. So, all right, John 1, 19 through 24. And this is the record of John when the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, "Who art thou?" And he confessed and denied not, but confessed, "I am not the Christ." And they asked him, "What then? Art thou Elias?" And he saith, "I am not." "Art thou the prophet?" And he answered, "No." And then said they unto him, "Who art thou, that we may give an answer to them that sent us? What sayest thou of thyself?" He said, "I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord, as said the prophet Isaiah." And they which were sent were of the Pharisees. So I'm going to go right over here. So if you have the Bible Gateway app, and I know that's backwards again, but you can actually pull up the life and times of Jesus the Messiah for free online. We're going to be in book 3, chapter 2 today. It's the deputation from Jerusalem, the 3 sects of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes, examination of their distinctive doctrines. And so he says, and let me skip down to where I have this book, but being on the road, I could not bring it. It was just absolutely too bulky. It's like that thick. And for those of you who are listening to the audio, it's like over 2 inches thick. It's a huge book. It's over 1,000 pages of tiny, tiny print. So I do want to mention this. He does say that the interview referred to occurred after the baptism of Jesus appears from the whole context. Similarly, the statement that the deputation which came to John was sent from Jerusalem by the Jews implies that it proceeded from authority, even if it did not bear more than a semi-official character. For although the expression Jews in the fourth gospel generally conveys the idea of contrast to the disciples, yet it refers to the people in their corporate capacity. That is, as represented by their constituted religious authorities. So that would be, so the three typically distinct parties are the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes, like we said. So this party, what he's going to talk about, we're going to go down here. We're gonna show that this particular party, like the Bible says, was the Pharisees, and we're gonna see why that was. All right, if I can find it, and I apologize, I don't have any of my highlighted notes. Nevertheless, it seems most probable that the priests and Levites came from the Sanhedrin, which are led to the conclusion that theirs was an informal mission, rather privately arranged than publicly determined upon. And with this, the characteristics of the deputies agrees. Priests and Levites, the colleagues of John the priest, would be selected for such an errand rather than leading rabbinic authorities. The presence of the latter would indeed have given to the movement an importance, if not a sanction, which the Sanhedrin could not have wished. The only other authority in Jerusalem from which such a deputation could have issued was the so-called Council of the Temple, the judicature of the priest, or the elders of the priesthood, which consisted of the 14 chief officers of the temple. But although they may afterwards have taken their full part in the condemnation of Jesus, ordinarily their duty was only connected with the service of the sanctuary and not with the criminal questions or doctrinal investigations. Finally, it seems quite natural that such an informal inquiry, set on foot most probably by the Sanhedrin, should have been entrusted exclusively to the Pharisaic party. It would in no way have interest to the Sadducees, and what members of that party had been seen of John, and I believe the reference there is early on in Matthew, must have convinced them that his view and aims lay entirely beyond their horizon. Now, the origin of the two parties, he goes on to say, the origin of the two great parties of the Pharisees and Sadducees had already been traced, and you can find that in Book 1, Chapter 8 of the Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah. They mark not sex, but rather mental directions, such as in their principles and natural and universal, and indeed appear in connection with all metaphysical questions. There are different modes in which the human mind views supersensuous problems, and which afterwards, when one-sidedly followed out, harden into diverging schools of thought. If the Pharisees and Sadducees were not sects in the sense of separation from the unity of Jewish ecclesiastical community, neither was theirs heresies in the conventional, but only in the original sense of the tendency. And what he means by that is, it was, so the word heresy literally means division. It wasn't like what you or I may think of as a heresy today, but rather it was just they had diverged. They were denominations, if you will. So with that, let's go over here. We're going to head over to a place called BibleHistory.com. And once again, I realize that it is backwards, but if you can mirror that, that's what BibleHistory.com would look like on your phone. We're going to look at the Pharisees, the Jewish leaders in the 1st century AD. It tells you where the name Pharisee came from. It is a Greek word taken from the Hebrew Aramaic parashah, which meaning separated one. They were one of 3 Jewish sects. The others were the Sadducees and the Essenes. So, and it's interesting, they give us an interesting quote right down here. So this quote is actually, if you come up, it is, and I know it's backwards, but it's Alfred Edersheim, if you know how to read mirrored writing. So we're going to read that real quick. There was probably no town or village inhabited by the Jews which had not its Pharisees, although they would, of course, gather in preference about Jerusalem with its temples and what perhaps would have been even dearer to the heart of a genuine Pharisee, its 480 synagogues, its Sanhedrins, great and small, and its school of study. There could be no difficulty in recognizing such an one Walking behind him, the chances were he would soon halt to say his prescribed prayers if the fixed time for them had come. He would stop short in the middle of the road, perhaps say one section of them, move on, again say another part, and so on, until whatever else might be doubted, there could be no question of the conspicuousness of his devotions in marketplace or corners of streets. There he would stand, as taught by the traditional law, would draw his feet well together, compose his body and clothes, and bend so low that, quote, every vertebra in his back would stand out separate, end quote, or at least till, quote, the skin over his heart would fall into folds, end quote. And it says, I'm guessing this is a reference to Barakot 28b from the Mishnah. The workman would drop his tools, the burden bearer his load. If a man had already 1 foot in the stirrup, he would withdraw it. The hour had come, and nothing could be suffered to interrupt or disturb him. The very salutation of a king, it was said, must remain unreturned. Nay, the twisting of a serpent around one's heel must remain unheeded. So the origin in history says the sect of Pharisees is thought to have originated in the 3rd century BC in the days preceding the Maccabean Wars, when under Greek domination and the Greek effort to Hellenize the Jews, there was a strong tendency among the Jews to accept Greek culture with its pagan religious customs. The rise of the Pharisees was a reaction and a protest against the tendencies among their fellow kinsmen. Their aim was to preserve their national integrity and strict conformity to Mosaic law. They later developed into self-righteous and hypocritical formalists. Later, they were among those who had condemned Jesus to death. However fearfully the prophecy of destruction that Jesus had foretold was fulfilled. In a few brief years, the Roman legions of the Emperor Titus utterly destroyed the city and its glorious temple. Over 1 million Jews perished in the siege in a few days, and 100,000 more were taken away in captivity. Without its marvelous temple, the Jewish religion was forced to take on a new character. And after the final Jewish rebellion in 132 AD, all hope of rebuilding the temple was lost, and the work of these rabbis took a different direction. The Mishnah, compiled by the Patriarch Judah in 200 AD, which is the final work of these rabbis, began a final work in the history of Jewish scholarship. It is a monument of Pharisaic scholarship and a testimony to the final triumph of Pharisaism, which now is compelled into the Talmud, which has become synonymous with Judaism. Now, under the heading Phariseeism or Jesus and the Pharisees, the Pharisees were the most numerous and influential of the religious sects. I'm not entirely sure about that because in the life and times of Jesus the Messiah, Alfred Edersheim says they only actually numbered about 6,000. So he actually says they were relatively small. So just keep in mind when we're going through these sources, make sure that you vet your sources, check multiple sources when you're getting this information. Because the simple fact of the matter is, in our modern day, we're far removed from the actual information from 2,000 years ago. So it goes on to say they were strict legalists. They stood for the rigid observance of the letter and forms of the law, and also for the traditions, that being the traditions of the elders, the oral Torah, that Jesus fought so vehemently against. And let's see. There were some good men among them, no doubt, people like Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. But for the most part, they were known for their covetousness, self-righteousness, and hypocrisy. Scribes were copyists of the scriptures, and because of their minute acquaintance with the law, they became recognized authorities. They were sometimes called lawyers. Scribes and Pharisees were the religious leaders of the nation. I have to say, hearing these guys that had a minute affiliation with the law, reminds me a lot of these people in the Hebrew Roots movement who will get up there and just blow wind for an hour and a half with all these pseudo-profound quote-unquote revelations, but they actually really don't know what they're talking about. There's no substance to what they're saying. Let's see. Let's go on. The incredible influence of the Pharisees among the masses cannot be mistaken. They were the most honored in Judaism at the time of Christ, when Christ won the favor of the people. Quote, but the crowd of people went on hearing him gladly, end quote. The words spoken by Jesus in Matthew 23 constitute the most bitter denunciation that could have ever fell from his lips. Let's go ahead, and while we're here, let's take a pause and look at that. Let's look at Matthew 23. Going to head back over to Bible Gateway, and we'll just type in Matthew 23. It's one of my favorite scriptures, and it was one of the scriptures that when I read it really made me decide, okay, maybe there is something more than meets the eye going on in the Hebrew roots movement. So Matthew 23 says, Then Jesus spake to the multitude and to his disciples, saying, The scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. All therefore whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do. But do not ye after their works, for they say and do not. For they bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne, and lay on themselves, but they themselves will not move with one of their fingers. But all their works they do for to be seen of men. And this brings to light that Alfred Edersheim quote we just read. They make one broad their phylacteries, and they enlarge the borders of their garment. They wear overly long seat, and love the uppermost rooms of feasts, and the chief seats in the synagogues, and greetings in the market, and to be called of men, Rabbi, Rabbi. But be ye not called Rabbi, for one is your master, even Christ, and all ye are brethren. That's why when we get into some of the teachings of Jesus later on in this series, the subtitle will be the teachings of Rabbi Yeshua. I want it to be ingrained in all of our heads. We have one Rabbi. He is our final authority. We interpret the scriptures according to him. That's what people would do when they were under rabbinic discipline, is they would interpret the scriptures according to their school of rabbinism. And that's where we have a true rabbi who knows the true meanings of the scriptures. We say we follow Jesus, yet we don't always follow the scriptures according to his interpretations. And if you would like to get a head start on that for whatever reason and have not seen it already, go check out the Doctrine of Christ series over on Jimmy Vision. Excellent work that Jimmy and David do over there. It will be a blessing. Please go check it out. All right. So, and let's see. And call no man your father upon the earth, for one is your Father which is in heaven. So I heard that this was actually I can't remember where I either read it or heard it, but I did see where that was a reference to apparently if a Sadducee sat on the Sanhedrin or whatever, apparently the head leader was called Father. So if that is in fact the case, that's interesting. But what comes to mind these days for me as a Catholic priest, neither be ye called masters, for one is your master, even Christ. But he that is greatest among you shall be your servant. And then skip down to verse 13. But woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for ye neither go in yourselves, neither suffer ye them that are entering to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayer. Therefore ye shall receive the greater damnation. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye compass sea and land to make one proselyte, and when he is made, ye make him twofold more the child of hell than yourselves. So, we're not going to be able to do it today just due to time, but please go read this chapter of Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah. One of the things that Alfred Edersheim says about the Pharisees is that they are called the fraternity. Instantly what comes to mind is Freemasonry, also known as the fraternity. And if you look into it, there are a lot of similarities between the two. You have to go through various degrees inside the order. There must be 3 people there when you are welcomed into the order. It's just so many similarities, it's untrue. Not to mention, look up the Masonic Circle in Israel. It is absolutely shocking that these groups are still around, just with a slightly different paint coat. So without any further ado, we're 20 minutes in. Let's move on to the next segment of the program, and that is the Sadducees. So let's pull up their information, and you can head over to Britannica and you can find an article on the Sadducees, the Jewish sect. That's at Britannica.com/topic/Sadducee. Sadducee, Hebrew Sadok, plural Sadokim, member of a Jewish priestly sect that flourished for about 2 centuries before the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in AD 70. Not much is known with certainty of the Sadducees' origin and early history, but their name may be derived from that of Zadok, who was the high priest in the time of Kings David and Solomon. Ezekiel later selected this family as worthy of being entrusted with control of the temple. And if you've looked at the priests of the inner court and the Jehovah Shammah, and the little series that David Carrico did on FOJC, the remnant gathering over there, you'll know this temple that Ezekiel was talking about, and it's in the writings of the Puritans. They can attest to it. There's several witnesses that this temple is actually the temple in heaven in New Jerusalem. So that it is that heavenly city. So we talked about that on our Transfer of the Priesthood episode of Likened unto Moses. So if you haven't seen that, go check it out. You can find it on our YouTube channel. Right there, it should be under our Season 2 playlist. So, and the Zadokites formed the temple hierarchy down to the 2nd century BC. The Sadducees were the party of high priests, aristocratic families, and merchants, the wealthier elements of the population. Think in modern terms. If you were looking at this in modern terms, you would see, think the old rhinos, these lifelong politicians. Because if you're not familiar, the United States Senate is actually set up around, they would be the closest thing you would have to American aristocracy would be the United States Senate, the 50 senators. There's actually designed to be an aristocratic branch of government. Excuse me. They came under the influence of Hellenism, tended to have good relations with the Roman rulers of Palestine, and generally represented the conservative view within Judaism. That's why I said, think of those rhinos. Think people, Mitch McConnell, lifelong, supposedly conservative politician. Matter of fact, member of the Senate, the aristocratic branch of U.S. government. There's several similarities. Read the life and times of Jesus the Messiah. You will be shocked by how similar the 1st century Judaism is to the current climate in the United States, which brings concern to my mind, because that wasn't long before Jerusalem ceased to be a nation. And if you just look at the direction we're heading, we're not far behind them. The moral decay in our society is just absolutely stagnant. It's rotting, and you can smell it from a mile away. The Sadducees were the party of the high. We already read that. They tended to have good rulers of the Palestine. While their rivals, the Pharisees, claimed the authority of piety and learning, the Sadducees claimed that of birth and social economic position during the long period of the two-party struggle, which lasted until the Romans' destruction of the temple in 70 AD. The Sadducees dominated the temple and its priesthood. The Sadducees and Pharisees were in constant conflict with each other, not only over numerous details and ritual of ritual and the law, but most importantly, over the content and extent of God's revelation to the Jewish people. The Sadducees refused to go beyond the written Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, and thus, unlike the Pharisees, denied the immortality of the soul, the bodily resurrection after death, and the existence of angelic spirits. For the Sadducees, the oral law, i.e. the vast body of post-biblical Jewish legal traditions, meant next to nothing. By contrast, the Pharisees revered the Torah, but further claimed that oral tradition was part and parcel of Mosaic law. Because their strict adherence to the written law, the Sadducees acted severely in cases involving the death penalty, and they interpreted literally the Mosaic principle of ex talionis, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Though the Sadducees were conservative in religious matters, their wealth, their haughty bearing, and their willingness to compromise with the Roman rulers aroused hatred of the common people. Wow, boy, is that the rhinos that are in the government. These so-called conservatives that really get nothing done to further the cause of their constituents. I've tried not to get political on this channel, but there's literally, it's getting unavoidable these days. Everything is becoming about politics, and that's one of the reasons that I wanted to ensure that this episode came out this week, is because we want to look at, when it comes to this tribalistic divide that is coming between Christians, whether they be on the right or the left or in the middle, whatever it may be. We want to look at how Jesus would have reacted and follow his example with dealing with this. And that's what we're going to get into here in a few minutes. Our third segment is going to be entirely dealing with probably one passage of Scripture. So I don't think we're going to have to get in time to get into the Essenes today, so I will try to have a written blog up soon. I've got one on a follow-up from last week's episode about Easter, which didn't air on the YouTube channel, but you can find it wherever our podcast is available, whether you listen to on Apple, Google, Spotify. That episode is up there. Understanding Easter. Hope it's a blessing for you. I enjoyed making it, and it really even helped put a lot of things in perspective for me, remind myself. It's good to remind yourself why you do what you do and why you don't do certain things. So, their lives and political authority were so intimately bound up with the temple worship that after Roman legions destroyed the temple, the Sadducees ceased to exist as a group, and mention of them quickly disappeared from history. Now, unfortunately, I don't have time, and believe me, I would love to. I would love to do an extended version of this podcast, but Alfred Edersheim goes on to talk a lot about the Sadducees in contrast with the Pharisees in this chapter, the deputation from Jerusalem. So please read it. It has helped the Scriptures come alive for me, and I hope it will for you guys too. So we're coming up on 30 minutes, so I want to go ahead and move into our last Scripture. And I'm sure many of you know exactly what it is. It will be Matthew 22, and so I've got to figure out. I'm not used to using Bible Gateway Mobile. I always do this in my studio at home. So I actually had this whole episode recorded last night, and something happened, and my audio went wonky for the second week in a row. So I wanted to make sure that what I think I'm going to do is I'm just going to clip this to my shirt and record the video podcast through this setup, even in my own studio. So let's see. All right. The same day came to him the Sadducees, which say that there is no resurrection, and asked him, saying, Master, Moses said, if a man die having no children, his brother shall marry his wife and raise up the seed unto his brother. Now there were with us 7 brethren. And so before we go any further, I'd like to give a little background with this. So what we have from what I've read with the Alfred Edersheim in this chapter of Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah, the Pharisees or the Sadducees actually approached Jesus with their trap. They were using a Pharisaic interpretation of things that would happen in the resurrection. And so we're going to take a look at that. Just keep that in mind, because this is how you deal with tribalism these days. All right. Master, Moses said, if a man die having no children, his brother shall marry his wife and raise up seed unto his brother. Now there were with us 7 brethren, and the first, when he had married a wife, deceased, and having no issue, left his wife unto his brother. Likewise the second also, and the third unto the 7th. And last of all, the woman died also. Therefore, in the resurrection, whose wife shall she be of the 7? For they all had her. And Jesus answered and said unto them, Ye do err, not knowing the Scriptures nor the power of God. For if in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God in heaven. By the way, that is a reference to 1 Enoch 15, verse 4. So go check that out if you've never read the book of Enoch. It's really interesting. But as touching the resurrection of the dead, have ye not read that which was spoken unto you by God, saying, I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. God is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. And when the multitude heard this, they were astonished at his doctrine. But when the Pharisees had heard that he had put the Sadducees to silence, they were gathered together. Then one of them, which was a lawyer, asked him, tempting him, saying, Master, which is the greatest commandment of the law? So now we have something from the Pharisees coming, which actually set up the thing in Matthew chapter 23. But one of the things that I want to hone in on, so how do we deal with the tribalism that's going on in America today between Christians on the right and Christians on the left? And we're using the term Christian here broadly. All right, I'll be right out. I'm almost done.
Sorry.
How do we deal with this? And we're using the term Christian here. When I say we're using it broadly, I mean we're using people that are at least paying lip service. How do we deal with this weight of right and on the left? We do exactly what Jesus did. We use the Scriptures, because people always ask me when it comes to politics whether I'm on the right or the left, and I always tell them I'm a biblical centrist. They're like, what does that mean? I'm like, Jesus said, neither depart from to the left hand nor to the right hand, but stay on that narrow path. And you know, if you've been on our website, if you've listened to any of our old episodes, we say Course Correction Radio, and our slogan is pointing you back to the straight and narrow. So how do we do that? We follow Jesus' doctrine. It says they were astonished at his doctrine. Like I said, he is our rabbi. We interpret the Scriptures according to him. And I know we flew through this episode, guys, and I'm hoping next week. It's been a little crazy. March and April are big months for us, so we're actually here doing a second celebration. Yesterday was my daughter's birthday, so we're having a little get together with family, and it's another little birthday celebration for her today. She just turned 5. So I'm going to go spend some time with them. I'm going to get off of here. If you guys have any questions, leave a comment down below. Don't forget to like the video. Share it if you think it'll be helpful to any of your family or friends. If you are listening to this on the podcast platform, which it'll be out this Thursday, send us an email at coursecorrectionth@gmail.com. We'll be happy to talk to you guys. Also, want to ask you guys a question. Now, I know most of the time I normally don't get many viewers here when it's live. However, if there is a time that works best for you guys, that's easier for y'all to tune in, leave that down below as well, so I can I'd love to see what time is best for you guys, if there's a day. Now keep in mind, I work like 70 hours a week when I'm not doing this, so I do work a full-time job. I'm a route manager, so I'm like all over the state when I'm not doing the podcast. However, I would like to make sure that I'm able to do it when you guys are available, because I want to start doing call-in shows. I want to talk to you guys. I want to interact with y'all. It would mean a lot to me. And as you guys have seen in the past, I am not good at looking at the chat. Hopefully with this, I'll be able to do that. Set up with Streamlabs now, and they've got their integration with the chat. I found is a little bit easier than to deal with, especially on mobile, than it is with OBS Studio. But yeah, and I'm sorry I'm talking fast. I'm going off of like 5 hours of sleep, so I am wired right now. But thank you guys so much for your support. It means a lot. Leave a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. If you have any insight in that, as far as with these three parties. I know we couldn't get to the Essenes. I apologize. However, I will leave, when I update the information for this episode, the show notes, I'm going to leave a link over to NowYouSeeTV, with their website, mystv.org, with a video from Gary Wayne with the mysterious Essenes. If you haven't seen it, you need to watch it. It's super interesting. We'll see you guys next time on Course Correction Radio.